We continue our conversation on the work done by Richard Spoor in the mining sector with the different communities. And you too, we would welcome your views. Hashtag the Modise Network. Richard, now you said, despite the efforts on the part of the communities and the mining companies to hammer out deals so that they can continue working together, government has not really been that constructive in playing its role, but they've unveiled the new mining charter. What's your take of what is contained in there? Is it going to work this time? It's been long in the works.
No, I mean, the devil is in the detail. You can come up with these broad statements, but unless you have a mechanism and a very coherent policy framework and structure to implement those kind of things, they will be a disaster. So the notion of community trusts, well, my experience of community-based trusts in the field of land restitution or in the context of mining is that in many instances these accrue to the benefit of a tiny handful of people, and there is no benefit whatsoever accruing to the majority of the people. So the scope for failure is overwhelming, and in fact they will fail unless some serious attention is paid to how we structure these things, how we do these things. So quite frankly, from the perspective of the community, this new charter is pretty meaningless.
Now, let's talk about the mine workers and their issues historically.
Yeah.
They have had the worst part of the deal for a long time, isn't it? And the evidence of that is the Asbestosis case and the Silicosis case. Just talk me through the history of the workers' rights and why they ended up with so much abuse and suffering.
So we're talking principally gold mining, which is the foundation of our economy. Gold mining to work depended on grand apartheid, the labor reserves, and the establishment of apartheid and separation to provide a cheap, renewable source of labor to the mines. So effectively what we saw for 100 years is that young, healthy men would come and work on the mines. They would be literally used, consumed, broken, killed,
and sent back
and
home.
Discarded
without
any consequence. So we have stories of mine workers being, until 1978 more or less, mine workers who got silicosis, tuberculosis, silicotuberculosis, an infectious disease that if it isn't treated properly is going to kill you. They were sent home untreated. They were dying on the trains going back to Mozambique, to places where there was no treatment for them. They were sent back to die. And we had this cycle where the mines were operating very profitably, but the labor reserves, Lesotho, the Eastern Cape, other parts of the subcontinent, were gradually being impoverished because the cost of the mining in terms of human health was being borne by those communities. They brought diseases home, they brought poverty home, they couldn't work, they were disabled. So while the center was systematically enriched and the profits grew in the labor supplying areas, they were gradually, steadily and systematically impoverished. And that created this massive inequality that we see.
Now, you took up the case on behalf of the mine workers. I want to deal with them separately. Let's start with the Asbestosis case. There's a bit of history there.
Well, there's a very, very long history. Asbestos litigation started in Europe, the United States, Australia, and we learned it from Europe and the United Kingdom. So the first litigation on behalf of South African mine workers was asbestos litigation in the UK.
Yeah.
We was working with those, that was in the, 1990s. Started working with those. But the idea then was you could only do it offshore, overseas. So we're suing in England. But there were South African companies who were involved, and it seemed just wrong that we weren't tackling them there. So we took on, coming out of that work, out of that English experience, what we learned, began to look at the plight of asbestos miners, particularly in the Northern Cape, parts of Limpopo and in Mpumalanga. And actually, within quite a short period, 6 years or so, achieved a very significant settlement. But the asbestos industry had been closed down by the late 1990s because of the international awareness.
Well, but there are some townships which still have the asbestos roofing.
Look,
I'm not sure. I mean, should that be removed or should have been removed by now?
There are schools in the Northern Cape that are very, very seriously contaminated with loose asbestos fibre. As we speak, there are hundreds of children, thousands of children, who are being exposed to one of the most potent carcinogenic substances in the world. And they're living and they're playing. Their school fields are contaminated. And a lot of those kids are going to die. And they're going to die a terrible death.
And
we know all about it. Yeah. I mean, the government knows it. There have been surveys, there have been studies. There are kids whose lives are endangered every single day, and it's not being addressed.
My. Very fearful concern for those children. It's a matter that I would like to raise as a separate matter to this. But the number of the mine workers that were affected as a result of asbestos mining that make up this class action lawsuit, how many are they, and what are the damages or reparations to be paid?
The value of the settlements, there were two settlements achieved, one for Gencor workers and another one with a Swiss company called Eternit. The combined value of the two funds was 600 million rand. Two trusts were established, in my view, well-administered, well-regarded trusts. And over the last 12, 13 years, since 2002, 2003, round about there, they have paid out perhaps 400, 500 million rand in compensation to people who contracted these diseases. It hasn't been plain sailing. I have attracted an enormous amount of flack from this. One of the issues has been that the trusts compensate only people who got sick. But there are people who were part of the case and who litigated with me and were my clients, and who are not sick. So they don't get any compensation, but they feel that they worked on the mines. Many of them feel subjectively they're ill, and they want money.
Yeah.
So
there are issues there.
There are always issues with these things.
The silicosis case, is it different to the
It's
asbestosis
different.
one? And tell me what's happening with that.
Well, the silicosis is a much bigger and far more difficult matter. I mean, we've been litigating since 2006. So it's 12 years of litigation. We first had to establish the right of mine workers to sue. Because under South African law, the law says if you're a worker and you become sick or injured, you can't sue your employer. You have to go to the workman's compensation, basically.
Yeah.
And it took us until 2011 to get the Constitutional Court to agree that, in fact, mine workers with lung diseases had a right to sue. And then began a very, very large case, probably one of the most costly, difficult, largest cases in South African legal history to secure some measure of justice. And I say a measure of justice because, as you pointed out, this is a 120-year legacy. You can't fix that. The industry is in decline. It's going backward. It has been in decline for a long time. And through a very long, difficult process, we reached an agreement with the gold mining industry. So the industry got together. Instead of dealing with separate gold mining companies, we're basically dealing with 90% of them, 90% plus of them, and have achieved a settlement to establish a compensation trust. Because of the size and complexity, it is an enormous challenge getting this thing implemented. Whether the settlement will be successful is a success. It was a good one, a bad one.
But how many potential beneficiaries are we talking about, and what is the settlement?
Yeah, well, the value of the settlement is 5 billion rand. That's the capital amount that's guaranteed by the companies. It could be more, it could be less, and depends on the take-up of these things. We anticipate that 10,000 plus miners will stand to benefit under the scheme. But a lot is going to turn on how it's implemented because, many of the miners, they're living in remote rural areas. You need to go there. You need to identify these people. You need to medically examine these people. And then you need to process their claims.
And in the process also run public awareness campaigns.
Campaigns.
I hope this is part of doing that. What can people do who might be watching this? Is there anything they can do if they know of someone?
Well, the process we're involved in now is getting the court approval for the settlement. So we have a deal, but until the court approves that deal, it's no deal.
Okay.
And the court is going to stipulate a notice thing, a very extensive notice thing, where information will be given through trade unions, through government offices, to alert people to their rights.
Something that is of the general public's interest is the matter of the Listeriosis case. Just briefly talk me through it. How are you putting the claim together, and what damages are you pursuing here?
Well, you know, by running the asbestos litigation and the gold litigation and some of the large community work, we've kind of developed experience of doing large cases. So we were approached by people to pick up when this listeriosis thing took off. We have over 1,000 victims. We have 200 children, babies who died. We have another 200 plus babies who miscarried. So we're talking about 400 dead kids. Which is pretty shocking.
Yes,
the scale of this thing is enormous. And there are a lot of people who've suffered some very serious injuries. And then there are quite a number of people who haven't suffered particularly bad injuries. They got sick, they were hospitalized, they're okay, they're fine. So the last months, we have been engaged in a process with Tiger Brands and the Department of Health about getting agreement on the way to take the case forward. So we're nearly there, where there will be an agreement that the matter proceeds as a class action. We're nearly there with an agreement on how we're going to screen people, and then we've just got to litigate about the question of liability. So the people are spread across the country. It's very challenging. It's an enormously challenge. You can imagine examining over 1,000 people for psychological harm, physical harm, ranges of physical harm, fertility, kidney damage.
But in due time, I'm sure agreements will be reached, and we'll hear more information.
I'm pretty confident that we'll be able to bring it to a satisfactory conclusion. The case is strong.
Sure.
The case is good. I'm sure we can do this thing.
Richard Spoor, thank you very much, and keep up the good work.
Thank you, Tim.
All right. Richard Spoor has been fighting the cause on behalf of the mine workers who developed diseases as a result of mining, and now the public, members of the public who suffered losses as a result of listeriosis. Richard Spoor, our guest here. And after the break, we'll be turning our focus to the arts. We'll be talking to multi-award winning musician Amanda Black. Stay with us.